Welcome everyone to the EJ Thriving Communities Grantmaking Program information session. My name is Brian Luukkonen, and I'm a communication strategist at RTI International. RTI is an independent nonprofit dedicated to improving the human condition. We provide research, development, and technical services to local, state, and federal governments, nonprofits, and commercial clients worldwide. Within RTI, the Grantmakers Program is held by the Transformative Research Unit for Equity, affectionately known as TRUE, and that division transforms traditional research practices and mindsets to reimagine and create systems that advance equity and social justice. RTI is responsible for supporting the EPA Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program for EPA Regions 4, 7, and for the National Central. Joining me today from the TCGM and React for EJ teams, I'm pleased to introduce Damian Pasquarelli, Laura Baum, Noel Siegfried, Kim Matthews, and Jared McMullen from the Thriving Communities Grantmaking Program, and Carmen Ritter and Karen Straza from the React for EJ TICTAC. Today's session will be recorded and available for replay, will be posted to our YouTube account and our website. Go to the next slide. Yeah, great. So today's webinar is the last in a series of information sessions and webinars, and today's session is focused on the final section of the application, developing your proposal budget. Questions about non-competitive applications or other sections of the application were addressed in previous sessions. Recordings for these sessions are available on our YouTube page and posted on the Apply page of our website. For today's session, we have three main objectives. By the end of today, we want you to better understand the program goals and objectives of the Cultivating Healthy Environments, Environmental Justice, Thriving Communities Grant-Making opportunity for your region. For this first section, you should have an understanding of the structure of the application and intent of the questions. Lastly, you need to be able to identify those critical or key elements of the first part of the application and how it is evaluated. So, as a quick refresh, we want to take a moment to review the intent and aims of the Cultivating Healthy Environments EJ TCGM program. So EPA's EJ TCGM program is one of the largest investments to address climate change and advance environmental justice. The program is designed as a pass-through model whereby EPA passes the funds through the grant makers to distribute and manage the smaller subawards to community-based organizations more efficiently than the traditional federal grants process. As a whole, the TCGM program is designed to provide federal funds to community-based organizations and other eligible organizations to support the planning, assessment, and development of community-based projects. To help meet the program goals, projects funded under this program should directly benefit and empower communities to address local priorities. As you're preparing your application, this is a key point that should be incorporated into your project descriptions, activities, and success. Today, we'll focus on how you can start to incorporate this information into this first section. When reviewing and making decisions about applications, the reviewers and the community advisory boards will be looking at how well the project application responds to the program aims of addressing longstanding environmental and health challenges within historically underserved and disadvantaged communities, improving the health, equity, and resilience of underserved communities, and benefiting disadvantaged populations. One of the primary goals of TCGM is to fund organizations that haven't traditionally received federal grants. We want to fund your project. In designing this program, we incorporated these three principles: reducing barriers to assist communities in developing and submitting successful applications; community-centered, meaning that community members are involved in making a decision that will affect their communities, serving as reviewers and members of the Community Advisory Board. The application and platform are intended to help make the application process easier. The TCGM program consists of 4 opportunities. Your organization should choose which program best fits with your project. There's nothing that prevents you from applying to all 4. However, if you submit the same project, you will be asked to prioritize and your application may not be considered under the non-competitive category. If you're applying for a non-competitive award, your organization should focus on that application first. I will now hand it over to Damian Pasquarelli to review today's section of the application, preparing your budget.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. Terrific job. We really appreciate you. Again, I'll just add my welcome to Brian's. We really appreciate you all being here and your interest in the program. So preparing your application budget. The application is divided into 4 parts. You can see here on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll be asked to answer all the questions in the budget part. This applies for both competitive and non-competitive grants. So that submission is, the budget submission is the same for each of the tiers. These questions, in total, the time to review, gather, and prepare your responses may take up to 12 hours. It's not continuous. You can break it down and do it on your own schedule. As you go through each of these, you'll see where it may take more or less time. At the bottom of the screen, while you're working on your application, there are 3 buttons. After you enter your budget, at the bottom of the page, you'll want to click Next. This will save your responses and move you on to the next page. If you reach a stopping point, and you can click the Save button on the online application at any time to come back and complete your work in the future. If you do submit a page as final, where the green, I guess that green circle on the budget there is all green, you will need to select the 3 buttons to go back and edit a section you've already submitted. One additional note is, in order to save your work and move on to the next screen, you'll need to add some text or number into each of the required sections. You can go back and change those at any time. Let's go on to the next slide and look at the budget specifically. Creating your budget. There are some potential resources and links we can provide either through the TICTAC or directly from info@thrivingcommunities.org to give you some examples of these. In general, there are 9 budget categories. Enter 0 for any category that's not relevant to your project. And please note there are no cost sharing or cost matching requirements. However, you are encouraged to leverage resources and share how you've done that when you're and describe those in your budget narrative. Next slide, please. You'll be submitting at least 2 budget documents. So in addition to entering the amounts in each section and the total amount, you'll need to upload the supporting documents. That includes a line item budget, which is usually going to be in Excel, and a budget narrative, which is likely a Word document. Ensuring that the amounts match in your submission online, your inline budget, and your budget narrative is incredibly important. I'll just stress that now and through the program. Many times we'll get applications and have to return them to the applicant for clarifying questions when this is the case. So we'll just ask you to do a final check on that as you are working through the process. Next slide, please. Here is a great example of a detailed line item budget. There are a number of other resources we can provide to give you examples of that. But the line item budget is detailed as a detailed financial plan that breaks down the expenses and the specific categories, allowing a clear tracking and management of the funds. Each item represents a distinct type of expenditure, such as personnel, cost, equipment, supplies, travel, and more. This link to the EPN budget guide will be included with the slides, and you can get that for additional references. Next slide, please. The next is you'll have to write a budget narrative, and that is a description of specific costs associated with each individual category. This budget narrative is a great example of that. It just is 2 to 3 sentences per line item in your budget. So it's a written document containing detailed description referencing each one of the costs. So just be sure to include a budget narrative line item description for each item in your budget narrative. Next slide, please. Now we'll go kind of one by one through the individual costs. So we'll provide you some tips on individual sections of the budget. For the personnel section, Please identify each position that will be supported under the proposed award by title. Briefly specify the duties of the professionals to be compensated under the project. State the amount of time, such as hours or percentage of time, to be expensed by each position under the project. Finally, state the amount of compensation to be paid each employee, student, or assistant under the project. Of note, as you'll see in the bullets here, salaries for personnel hired as subrecipients or hired as contractors and consultants should not be listed in this section. Those should be added separately under the contractors, and consultants should go under contractual line item. Next slide, please. For the fringe benefits category, indicate the basis for the computation of the rates, including the types of benefits to be provided. Those are going to vary by your organization, but a brief way to calculate those is listed on the screen here. Typically, the same fringe rate is applied to the same employee type. So you might have benefits for part-time or full-time employees, and you just need to articulate that in the description. Next slide, please. All right, got off track there. Indicate the estimated number of trips, points of origin, and destinations, and the purpose of travel under the travel section. There's a bulleted list here that kind of asks you to capture all the different subcategories that might apply to that. For each trip, itemize and estimate transportation and your daily costs. Specify how you calculated each type of travel expense, i.e. the current airline ticket quote, maybe an estimated cost from a similar or past trip, and or using any federal or government or organizational travel policies or limits on expenditures. Next slide, please. For equipment, it refers to any tangible property, including IT systems, with a useful shelf life of over 1 year and a cost of $10,000 or more, or your organization's capitalization threshold, which may be lower. A computing device that is a computing device is considered a supply if it costs less than $5,000 or your organization's capitalization threshold, even if it has a longer useful life. Next slide, please. For supplies, you'll need to add an itemized list of supply estimates by nature and expense. Provide the basis for the cost estimates and the computations, i.e. vendor quotes, prior purchases of similar items, or like items, etc. There is an example in here in terms of how you can calculate those costs and some guidance on how you might be able to add those into your budget narrative. The one piece to note is that printing supplies like paper and printer inkjet are not included. Included, but not specifically printed items. So if you're going to a printer to print brochures, letterhead, or business cards for your project, those costs are included in the other category. Next slide, please. The next is contractual. Please describe the products being acquired and or the professional services to be provided. Briefly provide a justification for any contractor selected. Professional services contracts, for professional services contracts, state the amount of time to be devoted to the project, including the cost to be charged to this proposed grant award. Indicate whether positive efforts have been made to utilize small and disadvantaged minority businesses where feasible. We do not need a subrecipient budget detail. So if you're providing subcontracts out to smaller organizations, we just need the line item showing the cost for the lower tier sub and a description of the budget justification, a description in the budget justification of what the sub will do. Next slide, please. For construction, you want to list items by major type, including miscellaneous items that have a value of greater than $25,000 or 10% of the total project estimate, whichever is less. State whether the contingency reserves are included in this category and identify the kind of items or activities included in reserve. Finally, provide the basis for the cost estimates and computations. I will also note that construction and major renovations are not allowed without specific authorization, and any grantor approval, additional grantor approval may be required. Next slide, please. The next category is other, and this is other costs not included elsewhere. This includes local mileage for staff to and from the office, local driving. You know, if you're going to the post office or you're providing stipends to staff to get to work, like public transit costs. And a few other examples are on the slide. Next slide, please. Final category is indirect costs or your overhead rate. There is an EPA guidance on participant supporting costs that we can provide as well. This includes local mileage for staff to and from their offices, local driving. Sorry, that's the same content. But the indirect costs are those that are common or joint in purpose across more than one project and can be easily separated. It cannot be easily separated by project. We are allowing a de minimis rate of 15% or your approved rate, your approved NICRA rate. Many small organizations are not going to have a NICRA, but that is the negotiated indirect cost rate. And furthermore, to add to that, the non-competitive awards will not have an indirect cost rate at all. They'll just be all direct costs. Next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about indirect costs. If you do not have indirect costs in your project, this rate only applies to some of the budget categories. You will need to calculate the subtotal of these allowed costs in your budget late in your budget to then calculate the indirect cost budget. So that is broken out a little bit here in the box. So it's showing the personnel, the fringe benefits, travel, supplies, contractual, and other. And then the second example at the bottom sort of shows you're going to have your total costs at the 65,000, modified total direct costs at 55, and then you're calculating the indirect costs for your total budget. Next slide, please. The total budget is going to calculate itself in the system. However, the top categories is where I'll just ask you to reiterate or early ask that you confirm that your line item budget, your budget narrative, and the numbers you're submitting in the system all match. We all have done late work on our budgets, making small changes to travel or to contractual costs, usually in your line item budget, and we just need to make sure you translate those and cross-check them to what you're submitting in the application system and make sure that your budget narrative is updated. Next slide, please. So we want to illustrate a few examples of unallowable costs. They're showing here. The program does not provide any funding for lobbying, legal advice, services, or representation, travel for federal employees, excessive consultant fees, or activities outside the eligible scope. Please note here at the bottom is kind of a small print, but it does say, your submitted budget will be reviewed by the Cultivating Healthy Environments team to ensure all the costs are allowable. And we will follow up with you and ask to revise your budget or provide additional information for one or more ineligible activities or unallowed costs if they're identified. Please note this does not prevent your application from being considered for an award. Next slide, please. Finally, I'll just wrap up with some tips on creating your budget. Make sure to be realistic. Build in a contingency in budget items. If you have no cost in a budget category, please enter 0. You don't need to list these items or categories in your narrative. You want to round up to the nearest dollar, and use the same budget categories in both the line item budget and your budget narratives. So it's really important to be able to do that so we can cross-reference the two, as I previously discussed. Finally, the budget narrative provide details to explain how the budget items are calculated and that the costs are reasonable to accomplish the project's goals. That's it for me. I'll turn it over for the Tic-Tac assistance.
Thanks, Damien. Hi, everyone. I'm Carmen Ryder. I'm with RTI International and the React for EJ Tic-Tac. So EPA has created Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, nicknamed Tic-Tacs, across the country. And for the Southeast, which is Region 4, as you all know, there are 2 Tic-Tacs, React for EJ and CERC. The websites are shared here on the slide, and Tic-Tacs support communities and community groups on learning how to apply for grant funding, identify grant mechanisms appropriate for your projects that you have in mind, identifying supportive connections in your state, in county, potential partners, advisors on environmental topics of interest, and also navigating local government support and agencies that might be of interest to connect with. So today, though, I'm excited to share that the EPA Tic-Tacs are supporting communities in applying for the Grantmakers Program. And on the next slide, we can move to that. We share exactly what we have put in action to date. So to support Grantmakers applicants, the React for EJ team at RTI is holding office hours, Grantmakers topical webinars, weekly application prep work sessions, and biweekly SAM.gov registration sessions. The SAM.gov registration sessions are led by the Environmental Protection Network, EPN. Office hours on the described there on the far left are held once a week. And these are open virtual sessions on Zoom where questions are answered in real time. There is a pre-registration required for these sessions, however, so that our team can prepare to answer your questions before we get there, if possible. And you can register on our events page at reactforej.org/events. The next office hour is tomorrow, 2 to 3 Eastern or 1 to 2 Central. And another one will be held next week on the 28th at 12 p.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Central. Next on the slide is topical webinars. Those have been for the topics of describing your organization, developing a project, and applying for non-competitive awards. Those have been completed, and the recordings of those webinars can be found at the Cultivating Healthy Environments website. These sessions the recorded sessions are also linked on the applications page. Weekly application work sessions are also currently being held on Thursdays from 3 to 4 Eastern, which is 2 to 3 Central. And these virtual sessions are group-based, with one very important difference from the office hours being that we have breakout sessions during the majority of that time where you can focus on a specific area of your application and get advice from NOFO experts. And those are also pre-registration required. They are listed, all of the work sessions that are currently scheduled are listed again on the reactforej.org/events site. Finally, the EPN, as I mentioned earlier, who has partnered with React for EJ, holds sessions biweekly for guidance on navigating SAM.gov and registering for IDs. The sessions are held on Wednesdays from 2 to 3 Eastern, which is 1 to 2 Central. And the next session for SAM.gov office hours is on the 29th from 2 to 3 Eastern, 1 to 2 Central. You can register for these at the EPN's website, and so you would look for the Environmental Protection Network. The site here is www.tinyurl.com/EPNSAM. And that would take you directly to the registration page. And I listed dates and times for these. They are regularly scheduled, but if you find that the days and times for these sessions are challenging or prohibitive to your schedule, we are always happy to receive feedback on the timing of these. We want to meet the needs of the broadest community in the region possible. So please let us know through our website contact us form or calling our 1-800 number so that we can find out how best to accommodate your needs. And that's it for
I'll forward you that invite.
the updates there. I'll pass it back to the Grantmakers team.
Thank you, Carmen. We have a lot of good questions in here, and I'm excited because we have a good group of people together to answer these questions. So let's try and get through this. The first question, I think we have some about construction. So I'd like to ask, how do we go? This is a question from Dana. How do we go about the specific approval for major rehabilitation? We plan to submit a proposal to address healthy homes issue, not changing floor area, but addressing structural issues. Does the specific approval happen post-submission? Would that be Damien or Noel?
I'm happy to take an initial swing at that, and others can correct me or add as they would. My initial understanding is yes, that is done post-award. So you'll submit your application, we'll collect all the data and follow up with any questions or approvals.
Great. So that permission that is required, you go ahead and submit everything, and then after that is when you get the permission. There's questions about a cap for construction. So we heard tier 3 construction. There's only a certain amount you can do. Is there a percentage or cap allowed for that? One person heard it could only be a maximum of 50% of the award. Do we have official word on that?
I believe that is what is referenced in the NOFO, and that'll be my best guidance is to reconsult that. If you do have specific questions that are applicable to your application, you could certainly direct those to info@thrivingenvironments.org.
Okay. We have a question, and I think Noel might be answering it right now, but it's asking about the indirect rate and if it needs to be 15% or if it can be lower. Noel, do you want to address that?
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I just got clarification. So the language is it's up to 15%, so it can in fact be lower than 15%. But we do need some percent. We can't leave it as 0.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's great to get these answers right off the bat here. I have a question from Cassandra about non-competitive applications. She's asking if they need to address QAPs and human subjects research as well. And I know that's not specifically budget related. Does anyone want to tackle that?
Yeah, your project would be determined in your application process whether or not you would need to fill out a QAP or a human subject piece. And there are some guidance and some tools within the application to determine whether you are eligible. But my understanding is that is addressed in the application process. If others want to chime in, please do.
And I believe that there are some slides on that in the Developing Your Project webinar as well. So it's probably unlikely that the non-competitive would have those, but you don't have to determine that now. You can go ahead and submit, and that will be determined after you're submitted.
Absolutely.
Oh, can we talk about letters of support for a second? We have somebody asking where they should submit those.
Yeah, they are not required under the project, and therefore they're not provided a space to enter those. So that's a little bit tricky. You could certainly include in your narrative descriptions that you've got letters of support from different organizations. There is some areas in the project to upload additional documents. They are technically defined as budget documents, I don't think you get a slap on the wrist for adding additional documents there.
Okay, thank you. We have a quote from Mation. We plan to hire a firm to do a water quality study. I assume it's best to have a quote from a potential firm, but is it also possible to estimate this differently? For example, if someone from the firm can't come out to see the site, but can give a rough estimate based on the provided project info.
That sounds like a very good.
How to get that quote.
I'm sorry. Oh, right. Yeah, I think there are certain sections, certain costs under the project that do require you to have 3 quotes, but I think that the course of action you're describing here is right on target, that you should try and get one that from one you're expecting, and then provide the specs to other entities to see if you can get more generalized quote as well.
Great. So we have somebody that's asking how the indirect percentage is determined. I know we went over that briefly in the slides, but maybe it would help if we spend another second talking about that indirect rate. And what that de minimis means in the 15%.
Damien, do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. So as Damien shared, the easy short answer is if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement or a NICRA, we use whatever rate is in that agreement, and that agreement has already been approved by the federal government. So we can just defer to that. That said, most people don't have a NICRA, so we will defer to the de minimis rate, which is up to 15%. So as I think I just shared, it's up to 15%. It can be a lower amount. And then in one of the other slides, maybe this is more specifically to your question, there was a nice little table about how you calculate the indirect cost rates. So when we share those slides, hopefully that little box that we shared about what goes into it will help. I'm not sure if we can easily get back to it or want to do that right
Looks
now.
like it's slide 25. And,
Okay.
oh, here it comes.
Yeah.
Yep. Looks like there's personnel costs, fringe costs. I think it's one more down. The slide numbers may have come off. I've got, it looks like there it is.
There you
Multi-color
go.
slide.
Yep. Yeah, so that tells you what goes into the direct costs. You can think of it kind of as like your overhead costs, so shared costs that help you run your organization. So, you know, power, electricity, IT support, those kinds of things go into the indirect cost. And then again, to calculate that percentage, it's basically you include these things in the box, and we also mention things that are excluded as well. But it is, if it's your first time doing it, we're happy to help you look through that and figure out the cost together.
Great, thank you, Noelle. We have a person asking if it's possible to use a portion of their non-competitive award to get 501c3 funding. Do we see that as a viable path or use of that money? Would that be Damien?
It might be helpful to hear a little bit more about that. What I'll do is take my interpretation of the question, and then hopefully the individual maybe submit additional if they need to.
They could also raise their hands and we could let them talk about it if they're interested. Or they can type either way, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll answer initially and see if we can get it across the line. This is a capacity building grant, right? So we are looking to help small organizations build their capacity and their growth. So if you're trying to hire a resource development officer to help write grants, or you're trying to build the capacity of your organization to improve your ability to implement grants, all of those would be eligible activities under the capacity building grant. So if you're talking about going to get funding, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Right. All right, I got a thumbs up on that, so that looks good. What is considered the market rate for what percentage of the award should go to salaries? Is there something that we should say about percentage of the award for salaries, or should that be calculated differently?
I think that's going to be hard, and Noelle, feel free to come off mute or say something. I think it's going to be hard to say that because each grant is doing different things, right? Some grants we've seen come in have been a majority of salaries because they're really looking at trying to build the capacity of other organizations, or they're providing direct services to within the community underneath a the environmental project they're trying to work on. Some projects are having a lot of equipment or having a lot of pass-through to buy. Some are looking at buying property, and so they're having smaller levels of percentage. So I think it really was going to go on the type of activities you're looking at providing and the type of services. And I think hopefully this answer tells you can submit a high level of salaries if that's where you're headed.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a person asking where they can find a sample budget narrative, if this is on the website. I know there was a image of one in the slides here, so maybe first I could see if Brian could talk about if and where to find the slides for these eventually. Do you have information on that, Brian? Sorry to call you out.
That's fine. We have not yet posted the slides on the website. If that's something that folks would like to view, that's something we can post along with the recordings. For the time being, I would encourage folks to access the recordings on the website, and for additional materials, including slides, we can work to get those posted on the site in as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else, maybe the TikTok, like to talk about where to find a sample budget narrative? Carmen, would you have any information on that?
We
Or
do
Karen?
have, if Karen is on and can unmute.
Yeah, I believe that on the EPN's website, our partner, they have a sample budget narrative, but I can definitely check on that before we finish up here. But they also have a suite of materials that can help you build a budget. They have some worksheets and templates that are the same as the ones that Damien shared earlier. So that's a good spot to look for that narrative, but I will check on their website right now and get back to you.
Great, thank you, Karen. I have a question from an attendee asking if salaries are also allocated on a reimbursement schedule. Noelle, do you happen to have any information on that? How salaries would be reimbursed or how salaries would be paid out?
Yes, if I'm understanding the question, they would be paid out on a reimbursement basis. So when you submit invoices, salaries would be included as one of the costs that you're submitting to be reimbursed. I'm not sure if that got to the
Would those be
question.
monthly invoices? So they would be getting some of that money every month?
That's correct. So you can do monthly or even quarterly. It's yeah, either one.
Okay. Thank you. So if that didn't answer the question, please feel free to submit another. And we have a few more minutes, so this is great. I know there's somebody asking if an organization has to be a 501c3. Who would like to take that one?
There are a list of eligible organizations in the NOFO that I would point you to. And the short answer is no, you do not have to be a 501c3. There are certain organizations you cannot be for sure, but there are a number of different organizations listed in there.
Great, thank you. So somebody asked if they would be able to contract a CPA and a grant writer as part of their funding. Would somebody like to answer that and where that would go within the budget?
Go ahead, Noel.
I can try. So it kind of depends. If the CPA is specifically for this grant and only this grant, which means they won't be doing any other accounting for any other of your other projects, or your organization as a whole, they could be included as a contractor. Otherwise, they should be included in the indirect cost because they're contributing to your organization and providing a service for all of the work that you do, not just the this grant. I would say same with the grant writer actually. So it it's really a question of, are they only for this particular grant and no other work that you do? Or are they providing this service to your organization for everything that you do? And that's really the differential. I hope that helped.
I think that's a great clarification, and I'd go, just add that, like, and each end of every year, you have to file your 990. And that's sort of what Noelle is talking about. Your 990 covers all the different contracts, and so you couldn't charge that to this grant solely. However, you could contact and communicate with your CPA about building capacity within your organization to have the financial and accounting systems you need to implement grants. And if they charge you for those services, you could charge those too.
Right. And I think this one might also be for Noelle. It asks, can you apply to further support a project that has already been partially funded? So.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're still having discussions about that. I think it's fine. Damien, do you have any?
Sure. I can have it. I mean, I wouldn't do the reverse is what I was going to add. Is like, I think if you have existing funding and you'd like to build out that work and continue to do more of it, yes, you could apply for additional funds that would supplement work you're currently doing. And you'd want to include the description of those leveraged or matched funds, in your application. I'd encourage you not to do the reverse, though. You wouldn't want to make your submission contingent on other funds you're expecting to get in the future.
And I guess just to add, that's great, Damien. We would just want to make sure that we're able to distinctly see like what this funding will be used for, separate from the prior project or, the project that's ongoing even.
That's incredibly important. I think that's a great clarification that the deliverables and the measurables that you're going to divide should clearly be defined for sure. That's a great.
Great. We have a question of, are these awards exempt from federal and state taxes? So this is tax status of these.
Your organization would need to be exempt from state or federal taxes in order to get the tax requirement, but not the funds themselves, right? Yeah, so you would not be tax-free by my rate. Like if you were registered to be a nonprofit organization in the state of Florida, you wouldn't need to pay taxes at Office Depot to buy the paper to implement the grant. But if you were but you wouldn't necessarily, if you went to Mississippi, if you weren't registered as a nonprofit, a tax exempt organization in Mississippi, you couldn't buy paper there and have it be. So I would say the total of the funds would not be tax exempt by my understanding.
Great, thank you. We have a lot more questions and I don't think we can get to all of them. We're about, actually, no, we have more time. That's great. Sorry, I was thinking it was 55 already. It's only 45. So let's keep going. Let's see. Can we talk for a minute about the payment arrangements of the different grant levels? So people are asking, for people funded under the foundational grants, is that a reimbursement-based grant? And what does it mean when the others say reimbursement-based?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So it's a little tricky concept because truly they are all reimbursable. So that means that you all will do the work, you send us an invoice and we pay you for that work that you completed. So regardless if it's a fixed price, which is actually what the non-competitive or the other tier one could be, either way, you all are doing the work and we're paying you for the work after you do it. That said, we understand that that could be difficult for a lot of smaller organizations. So I encourage you to apply. And if you do have any problems with the reimbursement, we can work with you to figure out a solution to that. And others, feel free to chime in as well. Oh, Laura, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Melissa would like to know if RTI is serving as the fiscal agency. I think there's some confusion as to if the money is coming from RTI or from the federal government directly, so what those obligations are. Noah, would you be able to talk to the funding source?
Briefly, yes. So EPA has contracted with RTI as the grant maker. So EPA is providing us with funding to be able to fund you. So the funding that you receive will actually directly come from RTI.
And with it coming from RTI, Melissa's asking, what is the net days on submitted invoices? So I guess how quickly can they expect to be repaid when they submit an invoice?
Yes, that's a good question. It depends on the contractual terms. It could be net 15 or net 30. Net 30 is our typical.
And is that 30 within 30 business days then?
Yeah, sorry, 30 business days from the date of your invoice.
Okay, but it could be within 15 business days if needed, you said?
It's negotiable. It's kind of on a organization by organization basis.
Okay, so it would be net 30.
Net 30 is the standard, yeah.
Okay. So somebody asks, what if they budget for a category and then do not use the money? Would they be penalized for that? So I'm gonna put out an example for them. So if they said they were going to use $200 for printing and then end up not doing that printing in the other category, do they get penalized for not using that money?
There's no penalty, and because of the nature of the reimbursement, you won't actually get the money for whatever item you purchased until after you spend it. So there really won't be any like leftover, I guess, if that's what maybe this question is getting at. Since it's all truly reimbursement, you're telling us what you already spent, and then we're reimbursing you for those costs.
Great. Shauna would like to know if there's a difference between a contract employee, so a 1090, somebody with a 1090, and a contractor. So I guess somebody that is a contract employee of your organization versus a contractor. Is anyone on this, we would like to take that one back and answer it later, maybe?
Yeah, I would hesitate to provide a hard and fast rule on that because answered on that to that. And Noelle, I saw you came off. You may have more to share than me.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I think we probably should get some further clarification if we could.
Okay. And on some of these questions where we're not able to answer right away, some of it might be we need more details. So if you wanted to send in a request to the website, just to ask your question specifically, we can make sure that we have the back and forth then to make sure we get all the information we need to be able to give you a solid answer. Okay, we have, there's a little confusion right now, and I think Damien, this would be you. So there's a little confusion about if you can apply for a non-competitive and a competitive at the same time. Can you talk to the status of applying to multiple and which ones you can apply to at the same time, but you can't?
Sure. No, absolutely. That's a great question, and it's one we've gotten often. You can apply for multiple grants under the contract, and you can apply for a foundational support grant as well as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Foundational support does fall under tier 1. And what we would encourage is that you, in a foundational support grant, you're asking for technical assistance or support to build your organization to be able to implement projects. If you have existing expertise and you've been placing volunteers to remediate type of environmental concern for the last year or two, and you're just trying to grow that capacity to be able to do more projects, then you could just detail your current capacity in your non-foundational grant. And be sure to clarify in your foundational grant, be sure that there aren't any descriptions in your foundational grant that say this is what I'm trying to build capacity for, and at the same time you're applying for funds to do the same work. So if you need to build capacity to do the tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, that would be taken into consideration by the community advisory boards who are going to make final funding decisions. Noelle, we touched on this in other venues. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to the foundational support versus tiered answer.
No, I think that was great. Yep.
Great.
Great, thank you.
I will have one more, Laura, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We do have some organizations applying for a number of grants at the same time. So the only other piece I wanted to add is that we really want you to put your best foot forward. Want you to find out what your number one priority is and categorize the greatest good you can do with the award and submit that first. especially in the foundational support areas where that it is designed to build your organization to provide, to be able, eligible for larger awards going forward. And the timeline of the grant is structured in a way that if you got a 6-month or 12-month foundational grant, you'd still be able to apply for tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 after 1 year. I hope that's helpful.
All right, I'd like to open it a little bit to the other panelists. I know you've been looking at the questions, so if there's any that we haven't answered yet that you in particular would like to provide an answer to, this would be a good time to answer a couple of those. So does somebody have one they'd like to come off and answer? If not, I can read another one for you. Okay. So one, I think this is in response to something that Damien said earlier. So they have an entity, we were talking about grant matching or using money for from another organization, and you said don't do it the other way. Julia's asking if we have an entity willing to match the grant if awarded, does that count as contingent upon funding? So they have a $700,000 budget, they'll apply for the $350,000 from us, and if it's matched, they will get the extra money. If they're not getting the, but can they note that the matching funds are available if they get the award letter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you should definitely include that in your application, describing those circumstances that you've got matching awards contingent upon this grant. I think the difficulty is, let's say you're asking for $350,000 worth of funding from this program, and you're expecting to get matched to $350,000 otherwise. Your grant, then, if you tell us you're going to do $700,000 worth of work and that other money doesn't come through, that's where you're kind of getting stuck. So I think you would probably just try and be very clear in your award that you can meet these deliverables. Put $350,000 worth of deliverables in the award that you're asking for from us. And then just note that you have this other work, another opportunity, and that you plan to do more than that with these matching funds from X donor.
Okay. Thank you. And I think we're right about at time for questions. Actually, let's see if we can do one, maybe sneak in 1 or 2 more. I'm not sure if this is Noelle or Kim on this one, but can you confirm if Davis Bacon applies to contracts in the $25,000 range for rehabilitation activities? I know we've had some questions before about general federal requirements, if will be a part of this award or not.
Not familiar with that. I'm sorry. We can take it back and ask unless Kim knows.
Yeah, I think we'll have to take that one back and ask on it for the specifics.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
Okay. What about if a project is finished in advance of the time originally proposed? They assume that would be okay. What if it takes longer than originally expected, as if something happens with the contractor and it's just not happening in time? What would happen in that case?
I'll chime in on that, and others, Noelle, if you want to chime in as well, I'll leave space for that. Certainly you can finish your project early. I don't think there's any issue with that. But the program does not currently offer extension. So there's not an opportunity for a no-cost extension or additional time to finish work not done. So all budgeted and activities described under the grant should be completed in the time provided. That said, if you are worried about those contingencies and you think you can do them in 12 months, the tiers allow you to apply to submit for longer time periods. So I would just encourage you to cushion that and finish early, adding additional time to your grant that you think you could get it done earlier on. But let me know if you wanted to add anything else to that for others too.
Okay, I think we're at a good time to wrap up the questions now. We have a few more coming in, but ones we couldn't get to now, we'll go ahead and add into our Q&A that's being revised and looking to be posted on the website soon. We also have other work sessions coming up, and I'll turn it over to Brian to give you those last couple details.
Great. Thanks, Laura. So as many of you asked about recordings, we are working to get those up on the website and the YouTube page. So thanks for attending the final webinar in the series. Appreciate you joining and all of your active engagement and questions. Next slide. So to stay in contact with us, you can join the mailing list that we have, or indicate your interest in joining a CAB or being a reviewer. Just to complete this brief form on the website. And I will, the QR code here on the screen will take you where you need to go. And if you have other questions or want to get in touch with us, there's lots of different ways to reach us. You can follow us on social media, visit the YouTube page for the latest updates to recordings. We're trying to get recordings of these sessions up as soon as possible. Send us an email or visit the website. Get in touch with us with any questions or clarification that you need. We appreciate your time, appreciate your engagement, and we're excited to help share this opportunity with as many people as possible and help you get in your applications. So with that, I think we're wrapping up, unless others have things to add before we go. Thanks again for your time, and I appreciate you all.